The building my brother Mark lives in, the one he brags about, the one with the doorman he tips at Christmas so people see him doing it. I own it. Not a share of it. All of it. He has written a rent check every month for 2 years and 8 months to a management entity he has never once looked into, and I have cashed every single one, and he has no idea. Let me back up because I need this out of my head. I'm 34. Mark is 38. Our dad Bo built a decent amount of money over 40 years. Nothing generational, but real. The kind where the house is paid off and there's property. Mom, Carmen, is still alive. Still very much a participant in all this, which matters later. The reason Mark treats me the way he does isn't complicated, and it isn't some deep psychological mystery. And I want to say this part clearly because people always ask. When I was 19, I dropped out. Dad had lined up a whole path for me, and I walked away from it, and I did it badly. I disappeared for about 7 months, didn't call, let Mom think whatever she was going to think. Mark was the one who sat in the kitchen with her while she cried. He was 23 and he took that on, and he has never, not once, put it down. In his head, he's the son who stayed and I'm the son who left, and everything he's done to me since is, in his mind, a bill I owe him. He's not stupid and he's not a cartoon. He genuinely believes he's the good guy. That's what makes it worse. By the time I was 26, I had my act together, but the story had already hardened. Every family gathering, Mark had a bit. At Mom's 60th, he did a whole toast about how some people build and some people wander. Everyone laughed. Dad laughed. I sat there and ate my chicken. Dad got sick in 2021 and it was slow. And here's the thing I've never been able to explain to anyone without sounding like I'm making excuses. I was there. I did the pharmacy runs. I did the 2 a.m. calls. Mark was there too, but Mark was there in a different way. Mark was there with paperwork. Because while I was doing the boring parts, Mark was spending time with Dad, talking about legacy, about the estate, about who could be trusted. And I want to be honest because I've thought about this for years. Dad believed him. Dad believed him because Mark had spent 15 years building the case, brick by brick, and I had spent 15 years not defending myself because I thought the work would speak for itself. It didn't. It never does. Dad died in October 2022. The memorial lunch was at the place Dad liked, the one with the bad carpet. Maybe 40 people. Mark had already been named executor, which I knew, and I had already been told there'd be a structure for me, which I also knew, and I had decided to keep my mouth shut and get through it for Mom's sake. I didn't get through it. Mark stood up with a glass in his hand and he did his bit. The building, the wandering, and then he looked right at me across the table in front of our aunts, in front of Dad's oldest friends, in front of my mother, and he said I was a loser who didn't deserve to breathe our air. Those words. Air. Like even oxygen in a room he was in was something I was stealing, and nobody said anything. That's the part. My aunt looked at her plate. Somebody's fork clicked. Mom put her hand on my arm and said quietly, "Not now. Not, that's out of line. Not, apologize to your brother. Just, not now." I got up. I walked out to the parking lot and I sat in my car for about 20 minutes and I did not cry. I want to be really clear that I did not decide to forgive him and I did not decide to move on. I decided sitting in that parking lot that I was going to spend as long as it took, and I was going to be extremely patient, and I was going to make him pay me rent. Not a metaphor. That was the actual thought. Here's what I knew that Mark didn't bother to learn, because Mark doesn't learn things, he performs them. Dad's estate wasn't one pot. Mark got the liquid, the accounts, the investments, the number he could say out loud at parties. What Mark absolutely did not want was the property, because the property in 2022 was a headache, a building with occupancy problems, a commercial ground floor sitting empty, deferred maintenance, and an assessment coming. He told the lawyer in front of me that he wasn't going to be a landlord, that he had better things to do than fix somebody's toilet at midnight. He said it like it was a punchline. He looked at me when he said it. So I took it. I said, "Fine, give me the buildings," and Mark actually smiled. He thought he'd offloaded a liability onto the family disappointment. He signed. Mom signed off on her portion. Everyone was thrilled. The responsible son got the money, the loser got the mess, the story stayed intact. That's the part that still gets me. He wasn't even suspicious. He was pleased. I spent 2023 and most of 2024 doing nothing but work on those buildings. I took loans I shouldn't have taken. I lived in one of the units with a mattress and a folding table. I did not take a vacation. I did not date. My mother called me twice in that whole stretch, and both times it was to tell me Mark was worried about how I was living, which, sure. And then, in early 2023, Mark's lease was up on his old place, and he wanted the building on the good street, the nice one, the one Dad had bought in the 90s and never renovated. The one I had just spent everything I had renovating. He didn't know I owned it. Why would he? He'd signed a stack of documents in a lawyer's office without reading them, because reading them would have meant admitting the property was worth reading about. The entity name on the paperwork isn't my name. It isn't a secret. Anyone can look it up, it's public record. It took me a form and a fee and about $90. Mark just never looked. He toured the unit with a leasing agent I hired. He negotiated. He asked for a concession on the parking and he got it. And he called Mom to tell her how he'd played hardball with the management company. I approved that concession personally. I was sitting in my car outside a hardware store when the email came through, and I read it 4 times. He moved in November 2023. First check cleared December 1st. I have everyone, not in some dramatic folder. They're just in my records because I'm his landlord, and landlords keep records. 2 years and 8 months. He's paid for the roof on the building his own father bought. He's paid for the new boiler. He paid, indirectly, for the commercial tenant build-out downstairs that finally made the ground floor work. Every time he complains at a family dinner about how his rent went up, he is complaining to me, about me, and he thinks he's making conversation. And I have sat there. Thanksgiving 2024, Mark told a room that he'd finally made something of Dad's money while some people were still playing with drywall. I ate my chicken. Mom's birthday last year, he asked me, in front of everyone, whether I'd landed anywhere yet. I said not yet. He patted my shoulder. I want to tell you I felt nothing. I didn't. I sat there and I thought about the exact carpet in that restaurant and the exact sound of that fork. So why am I posting now, in July, instead of just enjoying it quietly forever? Because 3 things happened this spring and they're all connected and I'm running out of room to stand still. First, Mark's liquid isn't liquid anymore. He's been living like the number he inherited was a salary instead of a total, and I've watched it. Not through anything sneaky, just through the fact that a man who's fine doesn't ask his landlord for a payment plan. In April, he asked. Through the agent. Not knowing it was me. I approved it. 60 days. Second, Mom sold her house in May and moved in with Mark. Into my building. Into my unit. Which means the woman who said not now is now, technically, my tenant's guest. And everything I do to him lands on her. And Mark knows it. He's already used her as a shield in an email about a late fee, saying his elderly mother lives here now. Third, and this is the one keeping me up, Mark has started asking questions. Not about me, about the entity. He wants to buy the building. He's been telling Mom and my cousin Eliza that the management company is amateur hour, and he could take it over and run it right. That it's exactly the kind of asset Dad would have wanted in the family. He's put in an inquiry. He's offered a number. He wants to buy the thing he already gave away, from the brother he doesn't know he's been paying, with money he doesn't have anymore. His agent wants a meeting with the owner. In person. Mark will be there. I've waited 2 years and 8 months for someone to ask for that meeting. I said yes. It's set. I haven't told anyone in my family a single thing. I don't know what I'm asking for here. Maybe nothing. Maybe I just needed to type it once before I walk into that room and let him find out what the air in it costs. Update 1. Okay. So, the meeting happened, and it did not go the way I've been rehearsing it in the shower for 2 years and 8 months. And I need to walk you through this properly because a lot of you in the comments told me to just walk in and drop it on him like an anvil. And I want to explain why I didn't. And then I want to explain what I did instead, which is worse. First, thank you to whoever said check whether he's using the family as leverage before you do anything. You were right, and I didn't understand how right until I sat down. The meeting was set for a Thursday morning at the management office. Not my office. I don't have a real office, I have a room with a printer in it. This is the leasing agent's office, which is exactly the kind of place Mark respects. Glass table, chairs that cost money, a woman at the front named Felicity who's worked with me since 2023, and who has watched Mark be rude to her on 4 separate occasions without ever knowing why I always smiled about it afterward. Here's what I decided, sitting in the parking lot beforehand, which is apparently where I make all my decisions now. I decided not to be in the room. I know. Believe me, I wanted it. I have wanted that 30 seconds of his face for a very long time, and I could have had it. But here's the thing. The second he knows, the game changes. Right now, he's negotiating with a company. The second he knows it's me, he's negotiating with his little brother. And he has 38 years of practice negotiating with his little brother, and he wins that one every single time because he brings Mom into it and I fold. That's the pattern. That's always been the pattern. So no, he doesn't get to know until knowing costs him everything, and it doesn't cost him everything yet. So I sat in the back room. Felicity took the meeting. I could hear it through the wall, which sounds cinematic but is just a fact about cheap construction. And honestly, I've fixed enough walls in that building to know exactly how thin they are. And Mark came in, and he was good. That's the part nobody wants to hear. My brother is not an idiot. He came in with a folder. He came in with a number, 2.4 million, which for that building, in that condition, post-renovation, is insulting but not absurd. It's the kind of number you open with when you think the other side is tired. And he did his whole thing about how the ownership is clearly an out-of-state entity that doesn't understand the neighborhood, how the ground floor build-out was overpriced, how he grew up in that building, which, by the way, he did not. He was there maybe 6 times as a kid, and how it should be back in family hands. Felicity told him the ownership wasn't looking to sell, and he pushed. He pushed for an hour. He asked who the principal was. He said he'd been paying rent there for almost 3 years, and he thought that entitled him to a conversation with an actual person, and not, and I'm paraphrasing, but only barely, a receptionist reading a script. Felicity is not a receptionist. Felicity holds a broker's license, and she has been doing this for 11 years, and she just let it go by, the way she's been letting his stuff go by for 3 years. And I sat behind that wall with my hands flat on a table listening to my brother be exactly who he is to a stranger who has no stake in the family story. Then he said the thing that changed my whole plan. He said his mother lives in the unit. He said she's 72 and she's not well, and that a sale wasn't just business, and that if the owner had any decency, they'd understand that displacing an elderly woman, nobody is displacing anybody. Nobody said a word about anybody leaving. He brought that up on his own, unprompted, to a leasing agent in the first hour, because he was already loading the gun he plans to fire at me later. He doesn't know it's me, and he's already using her. And I want to be clear about something because a couple of you asked if I've considered that mom's living there means I should back off. Let me tell you how mom ended up in that unit. Mom sold her house in May. She did not need to sell that house. It was paid off. She sold it because Mark told her the market was peaking and that she should get liquid and let him manage it, which he has now been doing for about 8 weeks. And I found out about the sale from my cousin Eliza at a barbecue on Memorial Day weekend, where Eliza mentioned it like I obviously already knew. I did not obviously already know. Nobody told me. My mother sold the house I grew up in, and I found out standing next to a cooler. I called mom that night. Not a text. A call? A real one, and we talked for over an hour, and I actually tried. I asked her why she didn't tell me. She said Mark handles that side of things. I said I would have liked to have been asked. She said I wasn't around for those conversations, which I have driven her to every appointment for 4 years. Mark has driven her to 0. But okay. I said, Mom, if he's managing your money, do you know where it is? And she got quiet, and then she got defensive, and she said something about how it always turns into this with me, how Mark predicted I'd make it about money. And I sat there listening to my own mother recite my brother's script back to me in real time. And then she said the line. She said, "You know how you are." I hung up and I sat in my kitchen for a while. So here's where I've landed, and this is where I need you all to tell me if I'm out of my mind. I'm not selling, obviously, but I'm also not just sitting on the rent forever like some quiet little saint collecting checks. That's not enough anymore. That was enough when it was just about the memorial lunch. It's not enough now that he's got mom's house money in his hands and my building in his sights. So I did 2 things last week, and I want to be honest that neither of them is nice. 1. I had Felicity go back to him with a counter, not a rejection, a counter. The ownership isn't selling the building, but the ownership would consider selling him the unit. Convert it. Sell him the condo he's already living in at a number that's fair but is a real number, $640,000, which for that unit in that market is honestly correct, and he knows it's correct. I made it real. I made it possible. Because here's what I know about my brother that he doesn't know I know. He cannot say no to a thing that lets him tell a story. He has been telling everyone at every family event for 3 years that he's going to own that building. If he comes back with nothing, that story dies. If he comes back with I bought my place, I got a piece of it, I'm an owner, that story lives. He will take the deal. He will take it even though he can't afford it because he already asked for a payment plan on the rent in April, which means the inheritance is basically gone, which means the only money he can possibly buy that unit with is, yeah, you see it. 2. And this is the one I've been sick about. I told Felicity to include a clause that says the sale is contingent on the buyer providing proof of funds, source documented, within 45 days. Not to catch him doing anything wrong. There's nothing criminal here, and I'm not accusing him of anything. He's not stealing from her. She'd hand it to him with a bow on it if he asked. That's the entire problem. He's not going to take mom's money. Mom is going to give him mom's money, in daylight, at a dinner, while everyone tells her what a good boy he is. And when he does that, when he actually does it, it's going to be on paper. His name, her funds, in a document I'll be holding. I'm not building a trap. I'm building a mirror. He's going to walk right into it because It's the only door in the room, and I'm the one who put it there. The counter went out on Monday. He got it Tuesday. He called Felicity 3 times that day. He came by the office in person on Wednesday without an appointment. And here's what he told her. And I heard this one from Felicity afterward, sitting in her car in the lot because I don't like being in that office when he's around. He told her that the family had a claim on that building, that it came out of his father's estate, that there were, and this is the word he used, irregularities in how it was distributed. He started telling people the estate was wrong. He's been saying it to Eliza. She texted me Friday, asking, very casually, if I remembered signing anything weird back in 2022, because Mark had mentioned something at a cookout about how the property side got handled fast, and how he'd been grieving and maybe wasn't paying attention. He signed it, in an office, with a lawyer. He read the summary page out loud and made a joke about toilets. I was there, but he's laying track. He's building the version where he was taken advantage of, and he's building it before he even knows I'm the one who owns it, which tells you everything about how his brain works. He doesn't need a villain to be real. He just needs one to exist. And Mom is in that unit. And Mom's house money is in his hands. And he's about to be asked to prove where his money comes from to buy a home from a company that is me. And the second that closing table gets scheduled, he's going to be sitting across from an owner he's never met. I'm not going to be in the back room for that one. Eliza wants to have lunch this weekend and talk about Mark. My mother has called me twice since Friday and I haven't picked up. Not out of avoidance, I just don't know what I'm allowed to say to her yet without it getting back to him before I'm ready. 45 days. That's the clock. I'll update when he answers. Update 2. He took the deal. Of course he took the deal. But that's not why I'm posting. Because something happened at Eliza's lunch and then something happened at my mother's kitchen table and I have 4 days left on the clock and I am not okay. Let me do this in order. Eliza. My cousin, Dad's sister's kid, 41, works in insurance, has known both of us our entire lives and has spent 30 years refusing to take a side, because taking a side in this family means losing half of it at Christmas. She picked a diner off the highway, the kind with laminated menus, because she said she didn't want to run into anyone. That should have told me something right there. She didn't want to talk about Mark. She wanted to talk about me. Mark had gotten to her first, 3 weeks earlier apparently, over a whole afternoon of helping her move a washing machine, which is very Mark. Do one physical favor and collect a lifetime of credibility. And what he'd told her was that he was worried about me, that I'd been circling since Dad died, that I'd been pushing Mom for money, that the property side of the estate had been handled while he was grieving, and that he'd been too destroyed to read what he was signing, and that his little brother, and he actually said this, his little brother has always been good at showing up when people are weak. Eliza asked me, over eggs, in a diner, whether I'd taken advantage of my father's death. And I want you all to understand that I did not lose it. I have spent 2 years and 8 months not losing it. I put my fork down and I asked her one question. Did Mark tell you he was executor? Because an executor doesn't get taken advantage of. An executor is the one who runs it. He signed the distribution. He picked what he wanted. He handed me the buildings because he called them a mess. In a room, out loud. And he made a joke about fixing toilets, and he was proud of that joke. He told it twice. And she went quiet, and then she said the thing that made me realize how deep this goes. She said, well, that's not how he tells it. That's the whole family. That has always been the whole family, not what happened. How he tells it. He has been telling it since I was 19, and I have never once fought him on the telling because I thought facts were enough. And I sat in that diner at 34 years old, finally understanding that I have been losing an argument I never showed up for. So I told her. Not everything, but I told her I own the building. I told her he's been paying me rent since December 2023. I watched her put her hands flat on the table. And her first reaction, was not, oh my God, or how, or good for you. It was, does he know? And when I said no, she said, you have to tell him. This is going to destroy him. Destroy him. He stood up at Dad's memorial and told a room full of our family that I don't deserve the heir. And my cousin's first instinct is his structural integrity. I said I wasn't going to tell him. That he'd find out at closing, and she got upset with me, actually upset, said this was cruel, said I'd been sitting on it for years like some kind of, she didn't finish the sentence? And I asked her what exactly the kind thing would have been. Should I have told him in 2023 so he could take the building off me? Should I have told him last Thanksgiving while he was doing his drywall bit? Should I have raised my hand at the memorial lunch and said, actually, excuse me, everyone, she paid for the eggs. We haven't spoken since. She's going to tell him. I know she's going to tell him, not because she's malicious, but because she can't hold something like that. She's never been able to, and it's been 11 days and he hasn't said a word to me, which means either she didn't or he's doing something with it. That's problem one. Problem two is that mom asked me to come by. To the unit. My unit. In my building. I went. Sunday. And I want to be honest about how strange it was standing in that hallway looking at a light fixture I picked out from a catalog while my brother's shoes were on the mat. He wasn't home. That was deliberate on her part, I think. Mom made coffee, and we sat at a table that used to be in the kitchen I grew up in. And for about 20 minutes, it was almost fine. She talked about her neighbor. She asked about my back. And then she got to it. And she got to it the way she's always gotten to things, which is sideways. She wanted to know if I could sign something. Mark had told her that because of how the estate went, there was an imbalance, and that a simple document acknowledging the imbalance would let him clean it up. She didn't know what that meant. She had a page. She'd been carrying it in her purse. She wanted me to look at it and tell her if it was okay, which she wanted the person she thinks got too much to advise her on the paper her other son wants him to sign. That's my family in one sentence. It was a draft acknowledgement. Nothing enforceable, nothing scary, just a paragraph saying the property distribution didn't reflect the decedent's intent, and the parties agree to revisit. It's not a legal weapon. It's a story weapon. It's a piece of paper he can wave at Eliza and the aunts and say, see, even he admitted it. He's not trying to win a case. He's trying to win the telling. Again. Still. And I looked at my mother and I asked her, straight, no anger, do you think Dad meant to give me less? And she said, Dad loved us both. And I said, that's not what I asked. And she said, your brother was there. And I said, I was there, Mom. I was there every single night. I have the pharmacy receipts. And she said, and this is the part I keep replaying, she said Mark needed it more. Not that he deserved it. Not that I didn't. That he needed it more. Because Mark can't handle not being the one who has it. Because Mark has been carrying the family since he was 23. Because Mark sat with her while she cried about me. And I have never been allowed to put that down either, apparently. Because I left when I was 19 and I came back and I have spent 15 years being the debt that funds his self-image. That's the reason. That's the whole reason. I finally have it in her own words. He's like this with me because the family agreed a long time ago that his worth is measured against my worthlessness. And if I'm not the loser, then he's just a 38-year-old man who spent his inheritance in 3 years. And she still doesn't know I own the building. She was sitting in it. She asked me to sign a paper about the estate while sitting in a room I paid for the boiler in. I didn't tell her. I know some of you are going to be furious about that. I told her I'd think about the paper, and I left. And I sat in my car in the lot of my own building for a while. Problem 3, and then I'll stop. The proof of funds came in Thursday. He cleared it. All of it. Cash, no financing, 640, source documented, and the documentation shows a wire from an account in my mother's name to an account in his, dated 3 weeks after her house closed, and the memo line on it says gift, gift. She gave him her house. Not some of it. The whole thing. Near enough. 72 years old, no income beyond Social Security, living in a unit she doesn't own, in a building she doesn't know her younger son owns, having just handed her entire remaining net worth to a man who's about to spend all of it on a condo, and she asked me to sign a paper saying I got too much. So here's where I am. He signs Tuesday. The closing's set. And every version of this I run in my head is bad in a different way. If I let it close, he owns the unit. And I've made my brother a neighbor for life, and mom has nothing and no house and no leverage and lives in his spare room forever. But I get the table. I get the 30 seconds. I get to be sitting there when he walks in. If I kill the deal, I keep the building whole. Mom's money stays where it is. But he never knows. And he goes back to the family and says the entity refused him, and the estate was rigged, and he keeps telling it, forever. And I stay the loser at every Thanksgiving until one of us dies. If I tell mom first, she tells him in an hour. And he shows up at my door with a version of events already built. Eliza knows. He probably knows. And he hasn't called. And my brother has never in his life had information and not used it immediately, which is the only thing that scares me here. Closing is Tuesday morning at 10. I'm going to be in that room. I know exactly what I'm going to do, and I've known since a parking lot in October 2022. I just didn't know until Thursday that it was going to cost my mother her house to do it. I'll post after. Final update. Tuesday, 10 o'clock. I was there at 9:40. I sat in the lot and I didn't rehearse anything because I'd been rehearsing since a different parking lot in October 2022, and at some point, you're just waiting for the door to open. Eliza never told him. That's the first thing. 11 days of me assuming she'd cracked and she just sat on it. She texted me Monday night, one line, saying she couldn't be the one to do it and she was sorry about the diner. So he walked in cold, completely cold. with a folder and a pen and that look he gets when he's about to be generous with somebody. Felicity was at the table, title company rep, and me in the corner chair. And Mark clocked me and did not react at all because in his head there was no version of this where my being there meant anything. He assumed Mom told me. He assumed I'd come to watch him win. He actually gave me a little nod, almost friendly. That's the part I keep going back to. He was glad I was there. The rep started the walkthrough. Buyer, Mark, seller, the entity. And when she read the entity name and then the name of the sole member of the entity out loud, off the page, in that flat voice they use for everything, he didn't get it. That's what nobody expects. He heard my name and his face did nothing for about 3 full seconds because his brain simply refused the sentence. Then he asked, kind of laughing, whether that was some kind of clerical thing, whether the family name was on it because of Dad. And I said no. I said I bought it out of the estate the same day you gave it to me, and you've been paying me rent since December 1st, 2023. He asked me to repeat it. I repeated it. And then he was up, and he was loud. And I'm not going to dress it up. He called me a snake. He said I'd stolen from a dying man. He said I'd been laughing at him for 3 years. Which fair. And the rep was trying to say something about stepping out, and Felicity had her hand up. He went at the estate first. Said he'd been grieving. Said I'd rushed him. Said he'd never have signed if he'd known what the buildings were worth. So I told him what they were worth. In 2022, they were worth a boiler that didn't work, a ground floor that had been empty for 14 months, a special assessment, and 11 vacant units. They were worth negative money. That's why you didn't want them. That's not my memory, that's the appraisal, it's in the file. You have a copy, you got it the same day I did. And he said, and I will hear this for the rest of my life, he said that I knew what they'd become. And I let him hand them over. And I said, yes, I knew. I stood in a parking lot after you told 40 people I don't deserve to breathe our air, and I decided to know. I spent 2.5 years knowing, on a folding table, in a unit with no kitchen, while you were telling Thanksgiving that I play with drywall. He said that's not what he said at the lunch. He said he was drunk. He said, I've never been able to take a joke. That's been my problem since I was a kid. That I disappear for 7 months and come back and everyone's supposed to... There it was. 19. Always 19. 34 years old and he still had to walk it back to when I was 19, because that's the only room where he wins. I told him he could have the unit. Sign it. It's a good price and it's a fair price and I'll shake his hand. He signed it. I need you to understand that. Everyone in the comments who said he'd walk out, he didn't walk out. He sat back down and he signed, because the alternative was going back to the family with nothing, and because in his head he was already writing the version where he made me sell him a piece and got one over on me. He was rebuilding the telling in real time, at the table, with the pen in his hand. That's not weakness. That's who he is. He'd rather own something he can't afford than admit he can't afford it. And when it was done, when the rep left and it was just us, I told him the part he hadn't done the math on. He'd just put every dollar of Mom's house into a home, not an investment. A home he lives in, illiquid, gone. And Mom's name is nowhere on it. Because he took it as a gift, memo line and all. Because he wanted it clean. And I own the building around him. Which means I run the association. Which means I set the reserve schedule and I approve the assessments. And the ground floor build-out note and the roof and the elevator modernization that's been in the reserve study since 2024 all come due. All of it legitimate. All of it documented by an engineer. All of it exactly what any owner would do. And his share of that is real money, every quarter, forever. And he doesn't have real money anymore. He has a condo and a mother. He said I couldn't do that. I said I could show him the study. And he switched, instantly. He started talking about family, about how Dad would want us to work this out, about Mom, about how she's 72, about how I'd be putting her out. And I told him she's not on the deed, Mark. You made sure of that. She's your guest. If she's out, you put her out. That landed. That one actually landed. Then he begged, I'm not going to enjoy typing this as much as some of you want me to. My brother, in a conference room with the chairs that cost money, asked me to take the building back, buy the unit off him at what he paid, undo it. He said he'd tell everyone the truth about the memorial lunch. He said he'd tell Mom the estate was fine. He was negotiating with his little brother, exactly like I knew he would, and it was the first time in my life it didn't work, and he could tell it wasn't working and he kept going anyway. I said no. Not out of some speech. I just said no, and I picked up my folder and I left him in the room. The fallout, since people will ask. He told the family within about 6 hours. His version is that I bought the property out of the estate at a discount while he was grieving, and then concealed my ownership from a tenant, which is a sentence engineered to sound like a crime and describes nothing but public record and a man who never read his mail. My aunt sent me a long text about how disappointed she is. Eliza has stayed out of it, which is the most Eliza thing possible. Mom called 11 times over 2 days. I picked up on the 12th, and that conversation was the worst hour of the last 3 years. Worse than the memorial, because she wasn't angry, she was confused. She kept asking why I'd let him pay me all that time, why I didn't just say something. And I said, because you told me not now. Because at the lunch you put your hand on my arm and said not now, and I said, okay, Mom. And I've been saying okay for 15 years. And she said Mark needed it more. She said it again, right there, unprompted, the same words she used at her kitchen table, and I realized she wasn't repeating a line. That's just what she believes. That's the actual architecture of her whole life. One son who needs, and one son who provides the contrast. I told her I'd help her. Not him, her. There's a unit on the second floor, 1 bedroom. It's good. It gets light. I'll put her name on a lease at a number she can cover out of Social Security, and she'll have a door with a lock, and nobody can move her out of it, including me, including him. She hasn't answered. It's been 6 days. She's still up there in his spare room, in the unit she paid for and doesn't own. And he's telling her every night what I am. Here's what I know. He can't sell. Not for years. Not without eating the transfer costs and the assessments and admitting to every person at every cookout that the story was a story. He's stuck in a home he bought with his mother's house, in a building his brother owns, paying me every quarter for a roof he didn't know needed replacing, and every time he looks out a window he is standing inside the proof that the version he's been telling since I was 19 is not true. I'm not going to see him again. There's no dinner where this gets fixed. I'm not looking for one. I've been asked a lot in the comments whether it was worth it, whether I feel good. I don't know what I feel. I know I sat at that table and watched him understand, and I know I've wanted that since a room with bad carpet and a fork clicking and 40 people looking at their plates. He said I didn't deserve to breathe the air. He pays me for it now. Every quarter. Same as everybody else in my building.